All right. Thank you for joining us again today for the Learning Organizations Weathering the Storm webinar. We have three people joining us today. Rena McClay, who is a Learning Project Manager, Mitch Weiss, who is a VP of Client Services, and Eric Worrell, who is the Development Manager here at Cavio. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to Mitch. Mitch, thank you so much for presenting today.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate it. Before we get into formal introductions of the three of us, I just wanted to take a second and welcome everyone to Cavio's Weathering the Storm webinar. I mean, the name of the webinar is pretty self-explanatory. We've really had some unprecedented times the past few months, not just in L&D, but everywhere across the world. So what we're going to do for about the next 45 minutes to an hour is to dive into what companies are doing, what L&D organizations are doing, and what we're seeing with our clients, and then having a frank and honest discussion with y'all about how you've been handling the crisis. Now, with that being the case, this presentation isn't going to be three talking heads just yammering on about what you should and should not do. It's really going to be interactive, and we want you to share stories. We want you to provide feedback, offer opinions, and ask questions. So we definitely want you to use that chat feature that Laura introduced you to do that. There's no doubt each of you has some unique situations and stories you can bring to the table, so we definitely want to hear them. Again, Laura's going to be monitoring that chat feature for us. If there's any questions or comments or any curve you want us to take around a particular topic, we'd be more than willing to do that. So we can flip to the next slide. Again, my name is Mitch Weiss. I am the VP of Client Services here at Cavio Learning. I've been with Cavio for about 2 years, just had my 2-year anniversary. But I've been in L&D about 25 years in multiple roles in instructional design and facilitator and strategic consulting. I really love training. It's become a passion of mine. I kind of, found it by accident, but it was a happy accident. So I'm glad I found it. Eric, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Eric Worrell. As Mitch mentioned, I'm the development manager here at Cavio. I've been here for a little over a year. Came over a little after Mitch did, but I've also been in training and development, adult learning for a little over 15 years in different companies and in different positions. So I have a varied skill set when it comes to development, whether it's graphic design, multimedia development, animation, or just e-learning development as a whole. Greenie?
Yeah, hi, my name is Rena McClay, and my background is Fortune 500 companies. I started off in sales and moved quickly into training, which was really my passion. So various Fortune 500 companies. And then it's half a dozen years ago, came with Cavio as a project manager, still loving the learning field. And then I occasionally get to help out with something like a webinar with Cavio or a learning leaders blog. So I get to step out of that project management role every now and then and do something different. I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Rini. You can flip to the next slide, Laura. Okay. Hopefully most of you are familiar with Cavio Learning, but for those of you who are not, Cavio is a learning company who, by the way, really, really loves learning. Now, I mean, we really love learning. In fact, we actually made our tagline out of it, for the love of learning. Everything you see, every time you see that hashtag, you're talking with someone who really loves learning as much as you do. And I assume that most of the people on this call are here because you do love it. We do a wide variety of learning development services. Of course, there's the traditional course creation, the e-learn, the instructor-led, the virtual courses, et cetera, et cetera. The list is really long. But we also do much more. We help companies plan and we consult with them on a wide range of learning development projects. Everything from change enablement to organizational design to LMS implementation to creating academies, centers of excellence. We definitely do a lot. If it's in the L&D world and you need it, we probably have done it. So if you ever have any questions at all and you just want to chat and talk with folks that love learning, give us a call, shoot us an email, send us an IM. We'd be more than willing to have a conversation with you and really share why we love learning. So next slide. So that slide didn't come out as expected, but basically we have seen a lot of things over the past few months, everybody. I mean, this has been really unprecedented. I think we can all agree none of us have encountered anything like this in our lives. In fact, I was talking with my my wife's grandmother, who's still with us, and she's saying, you know, she's never seen anything like this, and she's, you know, 80. So some of the experiences, you know, we've encountered in learning development, you know, probably pale in comparison to what society as a whole is encountering. It still matters. You know, what we do matters. And after talking with so many clients, you know, so many people out in the L&D world, we found some interesting things. Everybody's dealing with this crisis really in their own way. Honestly, no two stories are the same. We've had clients come to us and say everything from, you know, we have a 3-month instructor-led on-site academy starting in 4 weeks. What do we do? You know, all the way to, you know, what do we do if this ever happens again? Cavio is a pretty large group of clients we work with, so we've been trying to consolidate that and kind of see what the trends are, and that's why we're here. We wanted to start this discussion today by covering the 3 main reactions to the crisis that we're seeing from our clients. First, there are companies that are in the adapting mode, what we call the adapting mode. I really like to call this one, oh no, what do we do mode. You kind of know, you know, if you're in that position. It's those companies right now that have mission critical training that was set to roll. It was probably an instructor-led or face-to-face type training, and now they need to flip it to digital. They need to do it really fast. It's probably the most reactionary of all the 3 that you see up there. You know, quick flips, quick turnarounds just to get the training out there in a way to their people. The second group is the live training mindset. And again, if you're in this organization, you probably know it. These are organizations who typically, you know, have a majority of their courses done in the traditional face-to-face method, whether it be because of logistics or long-held beliefs or just the content being delivered. Now, they've been forced by necessity. Of course, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, but to do things virtually. They use virtual environments in e-learning to kind of, you know, dip their toe in it to see how it goes. And you know what they're saying? They're kind of saying this isn't so bad. This is something we kind of like doing, but we'd like to do more, but we have no idea how to do it. You know, we don't have the development staff on, you know, we have an LMS. We don't have the tools or the know-how to do that. Finally, there's the third set of companies that are looking more towards the future. This is somewhat of a wake-up call to some organizations, right? A lot weren't prepared at all for COVID-19. You know, they weren't prepared for anything. They might not have had contingency plans in place or any idea what to do if their employees, trainers, designers, developers, anybody got sick. Now they're looking, and it's kind of looking back going, well, if this happens again, what do we do? We want to plan. They want to look to the future and make sure that, you know, something like this happens again, they're prepared. There's also a fourth group. It's a sort of status quo company or a company that was really prepared, but we won't spend a lot of time on that today because those organizations obviously knew what they're doing and had a plan in place. So before we jump on to the first section and we really start to have a group conversation about this, I wanted to launch a quick poll to see where all of you are. Jess, can you launch the poll? You want to take about a minute and let us know where you or your company is, you know, how they're handling the crisis and where exactly you fit into one of these 3 categories or the fourth, which is other. You know, please do so. And if you do so other, please take a second and put in chat exactly where you guys think you are. It'll be interesting to see how everyone is handling it.
It's kind of interesting to see these come through, Mitch. It's kind of equal across the board, from adapting to changing mindsets to future planning strategic. It's so far adapting looks like it's pretty much the winner, so to speak, of them. Future planning strategic is coming in second, so adapting is about 41%. Future planning strategic is at 31, 33, and changing mindsets is 26%.
Cool.
We do have a couple
like
people adapting as well in the chat window. So yeah.
Definitely. Well, thanks for your input there. Looks like it's a nice spread between all 3, and it's kind of what we're seeing out of, like I said, a majority of our clients. You guys kind of mirror that. So, okay, let's jump ahead to the next slide. So the first area we're going to cover is adapting. You know, again, most companies are probably right in the zone, you know, right now, kind of that panic mode where you got to get everything out there as soon as you can. You might have an existing curriculum, the courses are set, everything was going great, and then bam, the crisis hits. You're probably desperately trying to, you know, flip courses at a crazy fast pace and probably can't keep up, and are doing some emergency planning and, you know, how to handle it. You know, probably the courses you're flipping aren't like optimal from a you know, quality standpoint, and they may not be meeting the need, but you're putting them out there just to make sure that training still continues. So we see a lot of challenges around that from both the project management the design side and the leadership side. And I think Rini, you probably give some insight on exactly what some of those challenges are from the PM side of things.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mitch. So a few major points that I would look at. First is prioritizing. So at this point, there's a lot to do, right? It's easy to overpromise because leadership needs things fast. And so then it's easy for us to agree, right? Like, yes, we say yes, and then it can get messy. So if you find, what you may find is you're delivering less robust solutions to meet a deadline, or that they get sloppy. They might not have quality reviews, those kind of things. So we need to remember that deadlines drive quality. This is something I've heard Eric say. So be careful what you sign up for. So if somebody needs something, this fast, let them know we can do that for you, but it's going to look like this, rather than them thinking they're going to have this kind of a robust solution and you're going to just, turn it around, in a few days. So managing that cool factor, I think, communicating, it depends on what cool factor you're looking for based on kind of how quick we can be. The other one is just really preparing for in the future for a quick turnaround. So do you have software tools? Do you have licenses? Does somebody know how to use the things you have license for? Does somebody need to learn how to use them? Kind of that ramp up, do some of that ramp up before. It's critical because a lot of people are doing that now. They're saying, holy cow, grab a platform, learn how to use it, and go. And so there's kind of some nuances there. And I would say from a preparation standpoint, think about the facilitator and maybe a moderator if you're talking about, live virtual. What about from an idea and a development standpoint, and then from a learner standpoint? Because if there's a new tool, like all three of those will need to learn something. So having some basics, job aid-ish, having some kind of a reference will be helpful. And then the very most basic, from my perspective, is the findability factor. I think I might have made that up, but I love it. So what's your file storage, right? What's the latest version? Is it in a share folder? Who knows where it is? The coordination of resources in development as well as in a review approval process, in order to say what happens if we need to speed things up. So you have a way that you do work now. But if you need to speed things up, then what do you do? And from my perspective, that's typically like what's the state of the content, and then alignment, like the review cycles. Those are the things that can hang things up. So all of those things may need to be looked at if you need to do things more efficiently. It's not just you. From my perspective, it's not just the development time. How long does it take to develop? Like in our instance, how long does it take Eric to develop something? It's more what's the state of the content, and how many things are going to need to be changed, and then is everybody aligned and wanting the same thing? So there's a lot of overlap in what I'm saying between project management and ID. So Eric, what would you have to add to that? Or I should say, Eric, what do you have to add to
that? Well, Rini, some of the lines, from a development perspective, I think the first thing you need to do as a company, especially if you're in the adapting phase, is to assess. You need to assess your skills and resources based on your current, workforce. So do your developers who might be on staff that create in classroom training, do they have the skills to develop e-learning, or do they have, a lot of experience doing webinars, screencasts, those types of things? Based on that assessment, you're going to determine, can these folks move forward in transitioning our current coursework into an e-learning format, or an online format of some kind, whether it's e-learning or not. Then based on that, you're going to determine, do we hire outside resources until those folks have those skills? We get a lot of companies that do the same thing with us. And then you need to determine, okay, based on that, also, what kind of tools are we going to use? Okay, do we use rapid development tools? There's Storyline, Captivate, a lot of different learning curves when it comes to those things. And a lot of different products that you can use. So there are options. What's best for your company? That's something you need to determine, excuse me. Also, how are you going to get the material out once it's developed? Do you need to get an LMS? Are you going to get a SCORM Cloud account? Are these going to be posted live to the web? Do they need to be trackable as far as who has completed my course? Those types of things. Some companies might have certain compliance policies where you actually have to have somebody show that they completed a knowledge check and received a 100% score so they can get credit for a course. Is that something that your company needs? That's something you'll need to determine, and then how are you going to get those metrics? So all of these things are very important when you're in that first adapting phase of how are we going to create things, who's going to create it, how are we going to track it? Those are kind of the overarching questions that you need to answer when you're adapting to, this virtual environment. Once you have those questions answered, then you can start kind of formulating a plan of who are we going to hire, who are we going to train, what resources and tools do we need, and then you can move on from there. Mitch, do you have more to add?
Yeah, from a leadership perspective, from an L&D leader, manager, supervisor perspective, there's a couple of things you really got to look at when you're in this environment, right? The first is, this probably isn't the optimal form of training that you're putting out there. It's probably, not really instructionally sound. It's kind of just done to meet the need. It might be some bad training that has to go out, and that might impact performance, right? We're all serving clients, we're all serving the department, we're all serving whoever the learner is. So in the short term, there might be some need for additional stopgap training that you might have to put in place to cover for some of that poor performing training. Secondly, resources are probably stretched thin or they don't exist. Oftentimes you'll have to have someone who maybe never did a webinar or maybe never did an e-learn, kind of has to step up to the plate and quickly learn how to pull one of these off. There's a lot of great resources that you can find online to help out there, but these folks aren't familiar with doing that. So you might have to kind of adapt and switch and flex roles a little bit. Thirdly, it's kind of expensive to do this, right? You either have to reallocate those resources, get some training for them pretty quick, really spend some time getting them, in order to understand how to do it, or you just might have to outsource it, and that's going to cost a little upfront money. The good news is that the training's still occurring. The business hasn't screeched to a halt, right? There's some critical companies out there. We work with a very large one who couldn't come to a screeching halt because, clients use them, especially right now. So they had to get that training out there. So although the training wasn't optimal and wasn't perfect, it really enabled the business to continue to keep going. Secondly, some of these companies, are looking at phased approaches, right? You might put something out there that's not the greatest thing ever, but you say, hey, it buys us 2 more weeks or 3 more weeks. And in 2 or 3 more weeks, we can put some additional training out there, maybe some job aids, maybe another webinar, maybe a PowerPoint, something people can view that kind of reinforce some of those areas and, create a sort of stopgap for what we do there. So those are some areas that, consider from a leadership standpoint. I had a question for both Rini and Eric. I think that the key to this phase is really time constraints versus quality, right? Most of these companies that need to get this done, they say, well, we've had this 12-week instructor-led training program, and we've got to convert it to a digital format, and we've got 3 weeks. And the original program took us 6 months to create. So I mean, from a PM's perspective, Rini, how do you really kind of quell any fears that the training's not going to be as good or it's not going to meet the need when you have that compressed time frame?
Yeah, one of the things I would do is just kind of educate people about standards. Like there's going to be a certain number of things we can do. It's going to look a little different, but we can accomplish the same objective. So that, I think that would probably be it, because they might freak out when they see that it, that it looks different and it's kind of, the cool factor isn't the same. But focusing on kind of what you're trying to accomplish, I think that would be the way to do it. And then also making sure they're holding up their end of, if we're going to do this, this is what we need you to do. That could be a factor as well.
Cool. Then Eric, how do you balance the quality with the time? How do you still put something out there that's usable and decent with that kind of time frame?
Well, especially for something like if somebody came to us and said, we have this 6 weeks course, onboarding, whatever it might be, we only have 3 weeks to convert it to a virtual training of some kind, and it took us, 9 weeks to originally create it. First, we say, okay, what are the most important, aspects of the training that you want your learners to walk away with? Because we're going to have to chop this up. Nobody's going to want to sit on a webinar for that long. Nobody's going to want to take a 6-hour e-learning course. So you need to break it up, and you need to break it up in a way that's relatable and learnable to your audience. So again, focusing on those key points of your training and breaking it up into bite-sized pieces. And that way, maybe you can do a kind of rolling development, especially if it's an e-learning format, where you can say, okay, this is going to be piece 1. Let's start developing that. As that's going through its development phase, you can start working on piece 2 and kind of just do this rolling development. So you're not trying to develop everything at one time. And then again, as both Rini and Mitch mentioned, quality over speed, right? So if you want us to do a 3-hour course in a week, okay, it's not going to have something a former manager used to say, a lot of dancing bears. We're not going to have custom animation. We're not going to do a lot of really complex interactions and stuff like that, because we're shooting for time. So you kind of have to balance, again, as Rini mentioned, that cool factor against your development schedule. If you want those types of things, if you want to go out and shoot some custom video for some scenarios, if you want to do some really good voiceover and have some engaging interactions, do some gamification and those types of things, okay, then we need more time. What you don't want to do is say, I want all those things and I still want it in a week, because it's not going to happen, and you're going to overextend yourself. You're going to overpromise, and you're going to underdeliver. And it's just going to come back to bite you. So again, immediately in that initial development phase of, hey, we're just starting our design. What is this going to look like? Look at your schedule and be realistic. Do not overshoot, because it will hurt you in the end, and you'll just come out with a worse product. So give yourself realistic goals, and your developers especially, because especially like now with what everybody's going through, when you give a developer 6 courses to build in 3 weeks, you're going to burn out your workforce, and they're not going to be able to keep up with the workload.
For sure.
So you definitely need to give them that paced and realistic schedule.
Yeah, both of you said something that kind of piqued something in my mind. Rini, you're talking about expectations, and Eric, you're talking about making things nugget sized and reiterating on it. Some people might see this phase as a bad thing, right? That, oh no, we gotta get training out there. This might actually be a good thing, because what it forces you to do is take a look at your training, kind of remove those nice to knows and focus on the need to knows, and kind of take that training that may have been huge and bulky and kind of whittle it down into a more efficient training. So you might have had a 6-week ILT, and through this process of rushing through this, you might say, well, we could actually train everything we need to know, and our employees could do everything, and we can do it in 2 weeks. So this almost forced need to refine it can be a good thing. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of people see this as an oh no moment. It might be an oh yes moment. So Laura, do we have any questions from the chat about what any of us are talking about?
Yeah, actually, there's one question, and it's right on topic. When you're talking about certainly not making sure that everyone isn't being inundated, how do you allow for curriculum change? So on a larger scale, you might be talking about, modifying even the curriculum, but you don't want to add a whole bunch of courses simply because, certainly they might be topical, right? They might have to do with how you deal with a pandemic and in a work environment, things like that. How do you balance managing that curriculum change without overwhelming your employees?
Eric, you want to cover that one?
Sure. Well, especially for stuff that's related specifically like to COVID, where your workforce and your learners might already have a specific curriculum that's mandatory, that they have to go through, that they have to take these courses. And now you're saying, okay, we have a training on COVID, we have a training on social distancing, and we have all these supplemental trainings that we want to give. First of all, if they're not mandatory, let people know that. When you communicate them out, here is a nice to know course with some information that could help you, whether it's at work or at home. Well, which right
Yeah.
now that's the same place for many people. So that it doesn't feel like they're being overwhelmed, that they can take it at their own pace, which is one thing that's great about virtual learning, whether it's a webinar that somebody couldn't make and you record it and you put it up in a library somewhere or on a share file or on your website, or it's an e-learning that they can access at any time, is they can access it at any time. So if they feel like they're just taking so many courses today and I can't do it, or I've done this all week and I don't want to look at another training course, that's still available to them.
Good.
As long as you let them know. It's all about communicating to your workforce and your learners that this is there, take it at your leisure, the sooner the better, but it's available to you. We're just doing this to help.
Sure.
Don't feel that like a rush to answer this call immediately.
A little more flexibility, no doubt. Another question that I have, Peggy was wondering if there's any thoughts on adjusting prices from F to F to virtual or e-learning, from face-to-face to virtual or e-learning.
Yeah, that's definitely a consideration, right? There's definitely a cost difference between face-to-face versus virtual versus an e-learn. And that's something that there's a short-term cost, but the long-term benefits will play out. For example, to create an e-learn is going to have a cost, right? You're going to have to, whether outsource it or bring someone in to create that e-learn. But if you think about it in terms of usability and repeatability, that e-learn could probably be used hundreds and thousands of times as opposed to just keeping it as an IoT. So, I mean, there always is going to be a cost consideration when something like COVID-19 hits and you have to make some quick changes. But you really got to think, what's the short-term spend versus what's the long-term gain? And if you can keep that in the back of your mind, it seems more reasonable to maybe spend a little bit of money and to try to get things out in a more usable fashion. So.
And then to add on to what Mitch is saying here, with a short-term spend, long-term gain, especially if you're outsourcing your e-learning development right now because you don't have the ability to do that in-house. If you can do that with a company that provides you your source files, that
True.
way future development, future maintenance is something you can move in-house for those types of things, then that's even a bigger benefit for you as a company, because now you paid for the initial development of the course, but going into the future, once you have your people trained up, if they're using tools and skills to develop that course that you're bringing in-house, now that course is yours. You never have to reach out again. Unless you need to, but more than likely, maintenance items and things like that, small updates, you can bring those in-house. And as Mitch mentioned, now that's just future benefit for you because you're not worrying about paying for that course anymore.
Definitely. Cool. Well, thanks, Laura. So the second step area we're going to step into is the live training mindset. So what that means is an organization, it's an organization that typically does a lot of face-to-face training. They're used to having classroom with instructors, and they probably either barely dipped their toe into the digital world or just have tried it. They may have dabbled a little in e-learning, but haven't quite adopted it. It's due for a variety of reasons, right? Some organizations may not have the infrastructure, they don't have an LMS, it might be logistics, the type of training that's delivering has to be face-to-face, or it might just be resistance to digital learning. Out of necessity, these organizations, over the past few months have probably had to kind of just do it, right? They've had to, do webinars, they had to do e-learns, they had to do things digitally. Now these organizations are kind of looking and they're saying, okay, we did it and it's not so bad, right? This could be another tool in our toolbox, which we can use to deliver training. But we don't have instructional designers and we don't have instructional developers and we've never heard of Storyline or Captivate. We don't know anything about it and they want to get going, but they're not sure how. Rini, I think this presents some new problems, right? For organizations that are kind of in mode. What are some of those from a project management perspective?
Yeah. So I think just being aware of the differences in the different delivery modalities. So classroom training needs more prep, right? More elements, more complications, more logistics. So reserving rooms and having props and classroom materials in comparison to digital online kind of on-demand solutions. And another challenge with the live training is thinking about, like I'm just kind of talking about, like what are the things you would want to think about? is what if the key person is out? That key person could be the course administrator. It could be a key stakeholder that, is a guest presenter. It could be a facilitator. So setting up plans to determine, who are the backups and is everybody ready? And then if there's a face-to-face leadership program, do you have a backup? If there's onboarding that you need to hire people and is there a backup? We actually have a client. It doesn't happen a lot, but we have a client that we've been doing e-learnings for 5 years. I wouldn't even know how many courses we have built for her. And every time we do an e-learning for her, she wants a PowerPoint presentation. And she might not even do it. It's not a full-out leader's guide, but it's a PowerPoint presentation. So you've got an e-learning, you've got a PowerPoint presentation. So you think, okay, why would you want that? Well, maybe there's a specific group of new hires that they want to do something for. And maybe for some reason, e-learning isn't available. Some countries got a different LMS with challenges or something. When you're looking at global audiences, there's some things. Or this is actually my favorite. What if we want to do a refresh at a sales meeting? So you've already got your PowerPoint. So now they need something and they can take a segment, out of it. So and then what I love about doing it then, rather than scrambling when you need it, is all of this information is already in the designer's head. You know what I mean? So taking an e-learning course and then creating slides, it happens, very seamlessly, very easily. So she just asked for that as additional. She said, I want this deliverable. It is the course. We need the files this way, and we need an extra PowerPoint presentation. Her SMEs don't even necessarily know she's doing it, or her stakeholders, but she knows that's the right thing to do. So I love that. Again, there's overlap here between PM and idea and development. Eric, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, from my perspective, one of the main things, especially when you have a company that's very live training focused, very in the classroom, and then again, as Mitch mentioned, that can be for different reasons. The main thing is when you're developing a course for virtual learning, and this is a little less when it's a webinar because you still have some engagement from an instructor point of view, but more when it's an e-learning is you lose that point of engagement, right? You don't have somebody in the classroom to answer questions. You don't have somebody to have discussions over a topic, to give anecdotes and stories and give your content context, which is something that is really beneficial in the classroom, right? You lose that aspect. So how do you manage that? That's one thing that your developers really have to start thinking about as they're developing courses or transitioning live content to a virtual environment of how do we manage not having that point of engagement. One thing you want to focus on is still making sure that in your trainings as you're going to a virtual learning is that you're giving your learners the why. Why is this training important? How does it relate to my job function? What are you hoping to see as far as the change in behavior after I'm completed it? And that's not just, providing a list of objectives. A lot of people that take e-learning are very familiar with the screen at the beginning of the course that says, when you complete this training, you will be able to, bullet point 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's not the why of your training. You need something to grab your learner's attention and to really show them why this is important to me. Why should I take 30 minutes, an hour of my time and focus on this course and its content and not just click the next button until I'm done. That's a really big issue once you go to that e-learning format. And that's what scares a lot of companies and why a lot of companies don't use e-learning is because they feel that's what their learners are going to do. They're going to click next until I'm done. They're going to take the knowledge check over and over again until I get a passing score, and now I'm done and I can move on, and there's no knowledge retention. But if you can give them that why, if you can get that buy-in at the beginning of the course, your learners will focus. They will take it in if you can do that. So that's a really big, important piece of it. Then along the lines with redundancy, as Rini was mentioning, is making sure that you do have those, redundant layers within your development team. You don't want to have just one person that knows how to pull metrics, just one person that knows how to load a course to your LMS, to SCORM Cloud, to ShareFile, wherever. Because once that person's sick, and hopefully not, but if they're out of the office, if they're on vacation, whatever the case may be, then you lose that function. And you don't want to not be able to post a course or pull metrics or develop something. So you always want to have kind of some redundancy, some layers within your development team so that somebody knows how to do somebody else's job in case they're not there. That's also very important. There are other ways that you might be able to get that engagement of not having a trainer in the classroom. Like we did here, you can have surveys within your course, even if it's a third-party tool like SurveyMonkey, where at the end of your course, you send them to, a pre-built survey that says, did you have questions on this course? What were your key takeaways? Those types of questions, and then have somebody dedicated to respond to those after the course is completed. So yes, it's not a one-to-one, I'm in my classroom and I'm talking to my trainer, but I still have some communication with somebody about the course material, and that avenue is still available to me. Mitch?
Great. Yeah, from a leadership perspective, there's a couple of pros and cons. I mean, let's just be honest, guys. There's going to be an increase in cost in the first, right? You may not have the software, you may not have Captivate or Storyline, you may not have a delivery vehicle, an LMS to kind of deliver that. You may need to again go get GoToMeeting or WebEx or something to deliver those virtual courses. So there might be a little bit of technology costs that's involved. But again, we talked a little bit earlier about how those front costs can be spread out and kind of negated in the long term. But you have to be aware that that's going to happen. Secondly, there's a reskilling of staff, right? Not one person can't do everything. You can't, have there's people that are multi-talented, but there's very few people that can do everything. Jack of all trades, master of none. So you might have to, reskill some of your staff, maybe take some of those facilitators that you might have had or some coordinators and kind of teach them some different skill sets, right? How to design virtually, how to develop virtually, how to use the tools, how to produce a webinar. There's a lot of free resources out there. There's a lot of paid training that you can take, but it's going to take a little bit of conversion, and it's not going to take, a week or two. It's probably going to take you a little bit longer to get those folks into the right position. Not only that, it's determining what that organization looks like, right? How many designers do you need? How many developers do you need? How many facilitators do you need? I think one of the other things you need to be a little bit aware of is senior leadership perceptions. I've typically found in a lot of the clients we work with that are a little weary of digital learning and e-learning. It usually stems from senior leadership's perception of instructor-led versus digital training. They often feel that, classroom training is the only way to go, right? That's the only way to train people. Put a SME in front of the room, put some people in the seats, and talk to them. I think now companies are starting to come around, like I said, because of this, forced, training that's being put on them with the e-learns and the instructor to see that there is kind of a different way to do things. So that may break up a little, but you might just encounter some difficulties there. Obviously, there's some huge pros, right? Flexibility with staff. You can really kind of diversify your staff, and facilitators can fill multiple gaps and multiple roles. It's going to create better training, right? Think about this. If you have one type of training in ILT versus 5 different types, you can kind of match up the content and the need to exactly the modality and exactly the delivery mechanism that'll work better. And that kind of gives you an opportunity to say, an e-learn might work better in this place than an ILT, which in the long term, possibly could mean less seat time. What do I mean by seat time? It's how long people are sitting in a chair taking a training. Typically, digital formats, take considerably less time than instructor-led. It's a much more rapid style of training. It's a much more focused type of training. So the less time those people are sitting in a classroom or sitting in a chair taking a training, the more time they're doing their job, right? Which ultimately is what we want them to do. Something to keep in mind, there's no magic switch on the wall that you can go and you can go from ILT to e-learn. That's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen magically. Oftentimes what companies do is they'll want to make this change and they'll want to make the move, so they'll work with an outsource partner, right? And my recommendation is, if you look for an outsource partner, look for someone who is willing to share how they do it, right? They don't hold all their secrets close to their vest. They really want to educate. They love learning. They really want to share with others how they do it. I know that Eric and I and Rini and most people I work with kind of really like to do that. We're a part of the learning community, and we like to be a part of the learning community, and nothing we do is a secret. So if you have an organization that wants to do some e-learn and maybe you haven't worked with Storyline, maybe hire a company to do a Storyline course and ask questions. How did you do that? How did you go about that? How did you make this happen? And learn from those companies that do that. I think it's a good exercise that can really kind of kickstart and energize a company into doing more e-learns and doing more virtual instructor-led trainings. So, Laura, do we have any questions from the crowd?
We do. How do you overcome the challenges of delivering in an e-learning world need-to-know training that involves practice elements such as role play?
Well, I mean, within an e-learning, there are ways of creating interactive scenarios, branching scenarios, where you can give your learner the option to choose, kind of a better, best, bad response to a situation, and then allow that answer to branch off into, multiple areas based on what they selected. So it doesn't just have to be don't look at an e-learning and think, okay, well, what multiple choice question am I going to ask? Where am I going to put my next drag and drop or hotspot? Those are kind of built-in commonplace knowledge checks, and there's nothing wrong with those if that fits your need. But with some creativity and with looking at some of the tools out there, you can get into some really custom interactions that allow you to do those types of things where you're branching off into multiple responses within a given scenario. Yes, you're not going to be able to do, a fluid live role play, on the fly with your instructor or with another, person in the class. We have to work within, the range of available tools that we have when we're doing e-learning. But you can still get out of that, 10 question knowledge check space and actually do some really cool interaction stuff. And if you're not sure how to do that, ask, like Mitch was saying, ask questions. There are a ton. I mean, go on YouTube and Google, e-learning scenario creation and things like that, or YouTube, Google, any tool like that. You're going to find a ton of tutorials and examples. Articulate itself has its own community with its own forums that developers of all types post their work on. They might not have your source files, but you can still see some of what they've created. They do like a weekly challenge. I believe it's weekly, not monthly, where developers can go and put things up based on the challenge that's currently up. And it might be creating a specific interaction, but you can get some really creative ideas off of there and be inspired on some new types of interactions to create. So that would be my answer for that.
Yeah, I agree, Eric. I think if you have a really talented developer or designer on your staff, or someone who's really creative, or you've hired a really creative company, you can kind of overcome that, right? You can do some of that. You can replicate some of that classroom-based training in an e-learning environment. Maybe not exactly the same, right? Like Eric said, you can't do the face-to-face, type thing, but you can do a lot of effective types of training in an e-learning environment. And another factor to keep in account too, when the ILT to e-learn scenario, there's this perception about safety, right? Failing in safety. So people are more likely in an e-learn to fail, right? And not feel so bad about it. It's not, when you're in a classroom and you do something wrong, you kind of get called out for it, and you may not do it well. So when you're in an e-learning environment and you kind of go through an exercise and you fail, you'll be like, shoot, I failed. Well, let me get it right. And they'll try it again. And we find that people do it over and over and over again until they get it right, which, I mean, obviously that would be a perfect state when someone does it 6, 7 times the activity until they get it right, because then they're learning that. So I think there's a lot of ways to replicate most of the stuff you can do in ILT and e-learning. So any other questions, Laura?
Nope, we can go ahead and move on.
Great. The third section we're going to cover is future strategic thinking. Now, this third type of organization is one who either had a really strong plan in place or is looking to plan for the future in case anything happens again. These are the type of companies that went through hell, and they're kind of like saying, we will not do that again. We want some type of strategic plan in place to make sure that if anything like COVID-19 or an illness or a downturn in the economy happens, we want to plan for the future. I know the COVID-19, honestly, people, was really a wake-up call for a lot of companies who never thought about this thing. You know, Rainey and I had a client come to us and they said to us, you know, we never expected this to happen. And this company primarily does instructor-led training. And they said, what would happen if half our instructors were lost to COVID-19 for weeks? How would we deliver our training? So, you know, we're going to work with them, kind of help them kind of strategize around what they would do. So a lot of these companies are looking in that type of mentality now, and it's a good thing, right? You want to plan, you want to make sure you're covered. So, I mean, Rini, from a PM standpoint, what are some benefits and challenges you see around this?
Yeah, I think thinking of Nirvana, I think of like having all the backups ready that we've talked about, having all the assets readily available for that client you're talking about, Mitch. We volunteered to set up a shared drive for them. We're going to be their backup for development because they have backups for many other roles, but they don't have backups for storyline development. So we already are housing their templates and some of their key assets so that if something were to happen, you know, we're ready and they're scrambling. So what I think other companies should do is make sure, like, where are our templates, our current and past versions marked well of courses, you know, where are access, passwords, what kind of cloud backup is happening so that it's accessible. I'll tell you, things stored on somebody's hard drive is hard. We know this, but we don't necessarily pay attention to it, you know, day to day. So I would have deadlines for file cloud backup and connect, you know, regular touch points with backups. Like it's the first of the month, you know, is your backup person updated or something like that. But I also think that there's an internal status that needs to happen. I think most learning leaders get reports from their group and say, where are things? You know, like, where are things? And if I was a learning leader, I would pay this much attention to it unless they needed me for something. But if a crunch happens and that person is not available, you know, whether they are stuck someplace and they can't fly back, or they're in transit or ill or whatever, now I'm going to pay a lot of attention to that status. So, you know, like where it is. And so I would actually recommend something like a portfolio kind of a document that would say, like, overall, what are the key pieces? Where are things located? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the course owners? Who are the SMEs? Where are we in the review process? So that if something happens, you do have that information. The leader is equipped. Instead of showing up and saying, I don't know, I'd like to help you, you know what's going on. So those are some points that I would just kind of ramp up that mentality, you know, and execution by team. Eric, what do you think?
For future strategic, I would say a lot of the things that I've already kind of mentioned in some of the other topics kind of carry over to this. But in addition, I would say that you kind of need to make sure that the other folks in your company outside of training and development are advocates for e-learning, especially if your company is in that live training mindset and has been in for a long time. I've worked for companies like that, and it's very hard to get, especially seasoned veterans who have always been in the classroom. That's always how they've done their training, you know, to make that transition to e-learning. They don't want to do it. They want to be able to talk to somebody. And so if you don't have their managers and other supervisors and other people throughout the company being an advocate for e-learning, then that negativity is always going to be there. And those are going to be the people that you're going to have a very hard time of getting their buy-in when you do have to give them an e-learning course. So you definitely want to kind of spread that message of, you know, this is a positive, here are the reasons why, and keep that message going throughout, not just when there's a crisis like COVID going on where people feel, okay, I'm at home, I need to take an e-learning, I get it, I don't like it. You don't want to get those same people back in the office and then, you know, give them an e-learning and have them think, well, now I don't need to do it. Why am I doing it this way? We're back in the office, put me in the classroom. You want to keep that positivity about e-learning and virtual training going from all levels. That's a really big point. If not, your developers are always going to feel like they're developing for an audience that doesn't want their coursework. And that's a very big negative when it comes to, you know, developers' mindset of, I feel like my job's important. I'm doing something to help my company and to help, increase others' knowledge of whatever topic it is. If they feel that those folks don't want it, then you're going to have a harder time, getting your developers motivated to create something. But if they feel they're being championed outside of just the development team, then that's a huge plus. And then again, going back, is just make sure it's not something if you are making this change to a virtual training environment, that doesn't mean you have to get rid of your live training, right? That you look at making a blended approach, making it part of what you do, getting your developers trained up to have that skill set, which is just a positive for them. Add that to their resume, help them learn more, and get certified in different things so that they can develop like that. Or make sure that you have a partner in place that can develop your e-learnings when things like this happen, or future development. And then again, making sure you have those redundancy levels within your training team for future development as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mitch, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to emphasize what you're saying there about executive buy-in, Eric, right? That is a key component, which a lot of people overlook. I find typically that it takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of push upward to kind of get those executives to buy in. And you may have the world's greatest idea. You may have the most well thought out, comprehensive plan that's going to cover you from A to Z in any situation. But unless that executive team and those leaders, those managers, those VPs, those directors buy in on that, it's never going to execute properly, right? It needs to come from the top down. So spending time with those leaders, explaining to them kind of really why we're doing this, why we want to go digital. Here's the plan. If this were to happen, this would take place is really a critical component that cannot be overlooked. Again, because like I said, the best plan, without that is probably going to fail. This type of strategic thinking and this type of planning is really forward-looking, and you really need to keep that in mind. It creates a level of stability, which not a lot of places have, but want, right? If things went haywire, what are we going to do? Who's going to cover what? How are we going to pull off training? How can we keep things going? It allows you to allocate resources where they're most needed in times of crisis. So you might have to pull Sam from accounting and Susie from shipping in order to teach a course, but you have a plan and the course can go off without any hitches. So it allows you to kind of spider web throughout your organization to make sure that everything's good if something were bad to happen. It also allows for a much more robust L&D department with a wide variety of skill sets. When you add things like virtual instructor-led trainings and e-learnings in there, you have a much more powerful organization who can have a much broader impact in your company, right? When someone comes to you and they say, hey, we have a learning need, you can say, well, I have this option, this option, this option, and this option. Oh yeah, we also have these 15 other options. Let's take a look what best works for you. So it creates a toolbox for you, which really can kind of help the business and drives learning and development, kind of drives performance on the business side. It also diversifies risk, right? When you plan for it, if you were to lose a couple of instructors, you've got a backfill, you've got a plan. It makes things less risky for you. And again, finally, the last thing this really does is it creates better overall training because the modality meets the need. Someone might come to you and say, hey, I got this great idea. You can go through your toolkit and you go, this type of training, this e-learning would really do a great job. We can do some deep scenarios. We can do some cool stuff with this. It really helps out. Rini, I had one quick question for you that came up. When you develop these plans, things in companies change. What do you think a good time frame to reevaluate these plans are? Is it a yearly? Is it every 6 months? How often should you take a look and kind of revise this type of thing?
That's a really good question. I would say it depends on how stable things are. If they change a lot, then it maybe should be quarterly. But if it's fairly stable, then maybe, every 6 months or every year, would do it. I would look at the kind of the complexity and the volatility and like, is there turnover, right? Is it the same people doing the same thing? I would look at some of those variables to decide.
Cool, thanks. Laura, any questions from the chat?
No questions, just a quick comment that you can find advocates for your e-learning sometimes if you coordinate the change effort with any current change effort that's going on with HR and
Absolutely.
blend those messages. So, yep.
That's a great point. Cool. So I think that we're running a little low on time here. In the we have some tips we created from a project management, a leadership, and an instructional design and development. So again, these will be included in the PowerPoint, which you all will receive as default in here. So we'll quickly run through these, just read through them because I think we only have 3 or 4 minutes. So Rini, you want to cover the project management tips?
Yeah, sure. I think balancing the conversation we touched on earlier, balancing the deadline with robustness. Like we can do this in this much time. If you need it this fast, this is what we can give to you. Developing training with flexibility in mind, almost maybe solution agnostic, so that you can have some variability in how it's delivered, and thinking about that at the onset. Mitch likes to say schedule like an accordion. So if it usually takes this long to do something and now you have less time, what are you going to do? Like based on need, what can you do to be flexible there? And then just ensuring the schedule adapt. This is an Eric-ism. Ensuring the schedule adapts to the project, not the project adapting to the schedule. So kind of looking at the balance of those two things. And then I think have the right amount of creativity. I adore creativity. I consider myself very creative, but it can get in the way. So like what's the right amount of creativity, and then the right amount of just practicality and getting things done.
All right, so for the instructional design tips, some of the pieces I have here, always include the why, as I mentioned before. You need that engagement, you need that buy-in from your learners. Balance engagement and visual appeal with valid content. If you have amazing content, but it's just like a ton of words on a page, you're not going to have people reading through it. There needs to be some visual appeal, some engagement, some interaction with your content, and there needs to be a balance there. The same way, if you have these really cool engagements but don't teach you anything, you're not going to have any takeaway. Think outside the box. What else can be integrated? As I mentioned, if you can use survey tools, you can use forums, chat functions, stuff like that. Anything you can think of that's virtual, see if there's a way you can use it in your training. If it's manageable by your team and your workforce, of course. Utilize media whenever possible. Video, audio, graphics, images, infographics, all of these help, relay your message. Of course, you don't want you're talking about, money laundering compliance training, and then you have a puppy on the screen. That's not going to work. But, so you want to make it relatable media. But you can get a Getty account or an iStock account, and you'll have access to video, audio, and images right there. So, there are a lot of resources for those types of things. Ensure courses aren't overly complex for your learners. Just like if you were browsing a website, virtual learning is the same. You want it to be user-friendly. You don't want to have 15 ways to navigate away from a screen. You want it very clear how I move forward and back. You want it very clear where your volume button is. And the same with any interactions you create. If you create a branching scenario, you want it clear on how I enter and move through that scenario. So, excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that. And the same way for keeping it not overly complex for learners, also overly complex for future developers. You don't want to have your current developer create this really amazing course, but nobody knows how to edit, update, or maintain. So you want to keep that complexity to a certain level. So future developers who might have to manage that course can manage that course.
Sure. Okay, and then I'll just read through these because I know we're low on time, but you make sure you have a continuity plan, particularly for specialized skills and systems. Keep in mind long-term savings outweigh short-term costs. And, don't fall into the cool trap. Maintain strong instructional design. Don't let the newest, greatest thing kind of wow you. Digital platforms don't have to be the modality, right? They can complement existing training. Eric said that you can have a nice mix of ILT and digital stuff, so that'll work. Don't don't overcomplicate and don't overprocess things. Sometimes just the natural flow of creating things is a good thing, and kind of putting some gunk in the gears is bad. Use what is right for your organization and choose a solution that works for you. Every organization is different. There are a million different tools and resources out there. Make sure you're picking the right one. Finally, watch for too much creativity. You need to really focus creative types, because sometimes things can spin out of control. And oftentimes we'll spend so much time being creative, we don't make anything. So, all right, next slide. Next slide, there we go. So I think we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for coming. And again, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to anyone here at Cavio, Rini, myself, Eric, anybody. You can always visit our website at caviarlearning.com. We really want to thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you picked up a few good things and a few good tips to bring back to your organization. And it was a pleasure chatting with you today. Thanks a lot.